New DNA evidence suggesting the earliest cross-species love story may be far older than we imagine.
In 2008, a team of scientists at Stanford University did something no one had ever done before. They collected DNA from 938 people across 51 populations on every inhabited continent on Earth. Then they fed all of it into a computer and asked one question: how are we all related? Every single population fell right where it was supposed to. Every single one, except for one group of people whose DNA contained something that should not have been there. How scientists read the human family tree. Every human being alive today carries DNA, and every time a population splits off and moves somewhere new, small random mutations build up in their DNA over thousands of years. The longer two groups have been separated, the more those mutations pile up and the more different their genomes look. Scientists use those differences to build a family tree, tracing everyone back to a common ancestor in Africa. And that family tree is backed up by an enormous amount of evidence. The oldest and most genetically diverse populations on Earth are found in sub-Saharan Africa, exactly where the theory says they should be. Groups like the San people of southern Africa carry the deepest, most varied genetic roots of any humans alive. When scientists want to find the root of the human family, they look there. Then, roughly 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, a small group of people, possibly only a few thousand individuals, walked out of Africa. They crossed into what is now the Middle East and began spreading east and west across the planet. As they went, they carried their DNA with them. Europeans clustered with Europeans. East Asians clustered with East Asians. The farther a population got from Africa, the less genetic diversity it carried, because each new group was founded by a smaller and smaller slice of the original population. The model works for almost everyone. Scientists ran the numbers on population after population, and the results kept coming back clean. Clean and predictable, with one population clustering near the next. The whole map of humanity stitching together the way a family photo album does when you flip through the generations. Right up until one particular group of people showed up in the data and made the whole thing look like a lie. So who were they? The island at the edge of the world. The Andaman Islands is located at the Bay of Bengal, roughly halfway between India and Myanmar. There are more than 500 of them, most of them completely uninhabited, covered in dense rainforest and surrounded by coral reefs. For most of human history, the people who lived there had zero contact with the outside world. When European sailors first encountered the Andamanese in the late 1700s, they were genuinely confused. The people on these islands looked nothing like the populations of mainland India just a few hundred miles away. They were short, often under 5 feet tall, with very dark skin and tightly curled hair. To the Europeans, on those ships, they looked African. But they were sitting in the middle of South Asia, surrounded by populations that looked completely different from them. Nobody could explain it. For 2 full centuries, anthropologists argued about who these people really were. Some thought they were the descendants of African slaves who had been shipwrecked there. Others thought they were a relic population, the last survivors of some ancient wave of migration that had been wiped out everywhere else. But without genetic evidence, everyone was just guessing. The Andaman Islands are home to 4 main indigenous tribes. The Great Andamanese and the Onge have had varying levels of contact with the outside world over the past century and a half. The Jarawa made peaceful contact with outsiders only in 1998. Then there are the Sentinelese, who live on a small island called North Sentinel Island and have rejected every single attempt at contact in recorded history, often violently. The Indian government now enforces a 5-kilometer exclusion zone around North Sentinel Island. and nobody is allowed to go near them. For decades, those protections existed for cultural and humanitarian reasons. Then the genome sequencing started, and everyone realized that the stakes were far higher than anyone had known. Because when scientists finally looked at the Andamanese DNA, what they found was a mystery that went back further than almost anything in human history. 50,000 years of silence. When researchers analyzed the genomes of Andamanese individuals in the early 2000s, the first result was already extraordinary. The Andamanese had diverged from all other modern human populations somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 years ago. That puts them right at the very beginning of the out-of-Africa migration. They were not a branch off some later wave of people moving through South Asia. They were the first wave, or something very close to it. To understand why that matters, think about what happened everywhere else that first wave of humans traveled. They went east along the southern coast of Asia. Some of their descendants eventually became the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians and Papuans. Others spread further into East Asia. But as the millennia passed, newer waves of people kept coming. Middle Eastern farmers expanded into Europe and South Asia. Steppe nomads from Central Asia swept across huge chunks of the continent. The Han Chinese expanded across East Asia. The Bantu-speaking peoples moved across sub-Saharan Africa. Layer after layer of newer populations moved in and mixed with whoever had been there before, overwriting the older genetic signals until they were nearly impossible to detect. But not on the Andaman Islands, because the ocean protected them. For 50,000 years, the Andamanese lived in near total genetic isolation, and because of that, they preserved something that had been erased almost everywhere else on the planet. Their genome carries the DNA of the first people to leave Africa and head east. That is what their dark skin and tightly curled hair actually represent. Those features are not African in origin. They are the ancestral human form, the way the earliest members of our species looked before thousands of years of adaptation to cold European climates or high-altitude Asian environments changed the appearance of people who moved to those places. The Andamanese are what we all looked like at the very beginning, and this discovery alone, the idea that a living population carries the biological memory of the very first human migration, would have been one of the most important findings in the history of genetics. But the researchers kept looking at the data, and what they found next was something that should not have been possible. The species that shouldn't be in there. In 2010, scientists working in a cave called Denisovan in the Altai Mountains of Siberia discovered something remarkable. Among the sediment and animal bones, they found a finger bone, a few teeth, and eventually a piece of skull. Not much, but enough. From those tiny fragments, researchers were able to extract and sequence a complete genome. And what came back was not a modern human, nor was it a Neanderthal. It was something else entirely. They called them Denisovans. The Denisovan fossil record is almost nothing. A finger bone, a few teeth, and a jawbone found in Tibet in 2019. That is essentially all the physical evidence we have of an entire species of human beings. Everything else we know about them comes from their DNA, specifically from the traces they left behind in the genomes of modern people. They interbred with tens of thousands of years ago. When researchers compared the Denisovan genome to modern populations around the world, they expected to find the highest concentrations of Denisovan DNA close to Siberia, where the bones were found. East Asians do carry some, around 0.2% in the Han Chinese. Tibetans carry a slightly higher amount, and interestingly, one of the Denisovan gene variants they carry is specifically linked to high-altitude adaptation, which is why Tibetans can live and work comfortably at elevations that would leave most people gasping. That is a real, verified example of ancient interbreeding actively helping modern humans survive. But the highest concentrations of Denisovan DNA on Earth are not in Asia at all. Papuans, Aboriginal Australians, and the peoples of Melanesia carry between 4 and 6% Denisovan DNA. That is more than 20 times the concentration found in East Asians. Then again, there are the Andamanese. Studies show that Andamanese populations carry archaic ancestry signals significantly above what you see in mainland populations. The problem is that the Andamanese have been genetically isolated for 50,000 years, so they could not have picked this up recently from neighbors. The Denisovan DNA had to have entered their gene pool during an ancient encounter before their ancestors ever reached those islands, which means Denisovans were not a small, isolated group in Siberia. They ranged across a massive stretch of Asia, possibly all the way down into Southeast Asia. They ranged across a massive stretch of Asia, possibly all the way down into Southeast Asia and the island chains of the Pacific, and we had almost no idea. DNA from a species that has no name. In 2016, a team of researchers from the National Institute of Biomedical Genomics in India published a major paper in the journal Nature Genetics. They had sequenced the full genomes of 10 Andamanese individuals and compared them against 60 people from mainland Indian populations, plus a wide range of data from other groups around the world. What they found in the Andamanese DNA stopped a lot of people in their tracks. Buried in the genome were sequences that were not modern human, Neanderthal, or even Denisovan. They were something else, something that sat at a deeper branch of the human family tree, basal to the Neanderthal and Denisovan lineages. The lead author of the study, Partha Majumdar, told journalists that the findings pointed to a third archaic human lineage, one that branched off from the lineage that eventually produced both Neanderthals and Denisovans, a species we have never found a fossil of, a species with no name. In genetics, these are called ghost lineages. A ghost lineage is an extinct population that has left no physical remains, bones, tools, or trace in the archaeological record, but whose DNA still shows up in the genomes of living people. The only evidence that they ever existed is the signal their genes left behind in the populations they mixed with before they disappeared. Interestingly, a separate team of researchers, including scientists from Harvard, challenged the findings. They argued that the statistical methods used in the original study did not replicate cleanly across other datasets, and that the signal could potentially be explained in other ways. That debate is still ongoing in the scientific literature. But here is the thing. Even the researchers who challenged the original conclusion agree that something unusual is in the Andamanese genome. The signal is there. What exactly it represents is what scientists are still working out. And the fact that two serious research teams are actively debating this right now at the very frontier of human genetics is not a reason to be less interested, but actually more interested. We are watching, in real time, as scientists try to figure out whether there is a third human species hiding inside the cells of a few hundred people on a chain of islands in the Indian Ocean. What contact did to a people who survived 50,000 years. Before British colonizers arrived in the Andaman Islands in the 1850s, the total indigenous population across all the tribes was estimated at somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 people. The British established a penal colony on South Andaman Island at a place now called Port Blair. Convicts were shipped there from the mainland. Roads were built, settlers moved in, and with all of that came something invisible and devastating: disease. The Andamanese had spent 50,000 years in isolation. Their immune systems had never encountered measles, influenza, syphilis, or any of the other terrible diseases that have plagued mankind for centuries. Within decades of regular contact with outsiders, The great Andamanese population, which had been the largest of the tribes, collapsed. They went from several thousand people to fewer than 100 in roughly 50 years. The Ong fell sharply too. According to Survival International, contact reduced the Onga and Great Andamanese populations by 85% and 99% respectively. Today, the numbers are devastating. The Great Andamanese number somewhere around 50 to 60 individuals. The Onga are around 100. The Jarawa, who only made peaceful contact with outsiders in 1998, number around 400. And the Sentinelese, who are estimated at between 100 and 150 people, according to the Anthropological Survey of India, remain completely uncontacted. Think about that for a second. A population that survived every ice age, storm, and catastrophe for 50,000 years was nearly wiped out in 50. And the thing that nearly destroyed them was not war, but proximity to a world they had been protected from for longer than most human civilizations have existed. The archive that scientists had spent years realizing was priceless had nearly been erased before they even knew it was there. The island that shoots back. North Sentinel Island is roughly the size of Manhattan. It sits in the Bay of Bengal, ringed by reefs, covered almost entirely in dense jungle. The Sentinelese have lived there for tens of thousands of years, and in all of recorded history, they have rejected every single attempt to make contact with them, almost always with bows and arrows. The history of attempted contact is genuinely strange. In 1880, a British naval officer named Maurice Portman landed on the island and kidnapped several Sentinelese people, including an elderly couple and some children, and took them back to Port Blair. The elderly couple died within days. The children were returned to the island. Nobody knows what lasting effect that event had on the Sentinelese understanding of outsiders, but it probably did not help. In January 2006, 2 Indian fishermen whose boat drifted too close to the island while they slept were killed by Sentinelese arrows. Their bodies could not be recovered. Then, in November 2018, a 26-year-old American named John Allen Chow paid local fishermen to take him near the island because he wanted to convert the tribe to Christianity. He made several attempts over a few days, was warned off with arrows each time, and on his final attempt, he was killed. The Indian government did not pursue charges against the tribe. Officials stated clearly that the tribe was protecting itself and that any intrusion would put them at serious risk of disease. After the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, a helicopter flew over North Sentinel Island to check whether the tribe had survived. A Sentinelese man walked out of the trees and fired arrows at the helicopter, so the crew concluded the tribe was alive. No further contact was attempted, and no medical aid was offered because the Indian government had already learned what contact costs, and the Sentinelese had already made their position clear. Their genome has never been sequenced. Whatever ancient DNA they carry is completely unknown to science. It may stay that way forever. The human family is not a tree. In all these, here is what the Andamanese, taken all together, actually tell us about human history. For most of our existence as a species, we were not alone. The world was full of other kinds of humans. Neanderthals lived across Europe and parts of Western Asia for at least 400,000 years. Denisovans ranged across a massive stretch of Asia, from the frozen mountains of Siberia all the way down to the tropical regions of Southeast Asia. And possibly, based on what the Andamanese genome suggests, there were others we have not even identified yet. Multiple kinds of human beings, all walking the earth at the same time, and sometimes having children together. That is not the story most of us learned in school. The version we got was a clean line, stating that there was one species, one migration, and possibly one family tree. But the actual picture looks less like a tree and more like a tangled root system, with different branches meeting and merging and separating across hundreds of thousands of years. The fact is, ghost lineages are not unique to the Andamanese. Researchers have found similar signals in West African populations and in Central African forest-dwelling groups. These ancient genetic echoes are scattered across the human genome in dozens of populations around the world. And the reason commercial DNA tests sometimes show small, unexplained percentages labeled as ancient or unclassified is precisely because we are still discovering who all of our ancestors really were. The Andamanese are the most concentrated, best-preserved example of layered ancient ancestry anywhere on Earth. They carry the genetic memory of people who lived and died long before any city was built, any word was written down, or any nation was named. And researchers have called for their full genomes to be sequenced and preserved in international databases, not for commercial reasons, but because losing that record would be like losing a library that took 100,000 years to write. Some of that work is already happening, slowly, with the consent of the tribes involved. The Great Andamanese and the Ongji have both allowed researchers to collect samples for long-term preservation. But the Sentinelese, the group that may carry the oldest and least disturbed version of all of this, remain completely beyond reach. And since this is the case, we may never be allowed to study the genome the Sentinelese carry. The question then is, should we really continue to let them remain secluded? At what point does science trump isolation? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. And if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.